Hey, in this video we'll cover 3 elements of successful speech therapy for stuttering. Who is it for? Obviously it's for speech language pathologists who work with people who stutter. But if you're a person who stutters, it's for you as well, because you don't want to be an object in speech therapy, you want to be subject. If the speech therapist is the captain of the ship, you are the owner of the ship, you are the boss, you decide. And if you're a parent of a child who stutters, it depends. Speech therapy for toddlers and small kids is a separate topic. But if we're talking about teens, I would say pretty much all the same principles apply. So what is successful speech therapy for stuttering, and how can we bring it to life? Let's dive in. First off, how do you define success in speech therapy for stuttering? And yes, the answer comes down to those 3 elements we're going to talk about. If you start working with your clients on them, that's already success. But what's the result? What's the destination? Where are we going? You want to be able to distill that result into one phrase, or ideally into one word. So how do you define success of speech therapy for stuttering in one phrase, or maybe one word? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment. At first glance, the answer to this question might seem obvious. Of course, we want to reduce stuttering, increase fluency. That seems to make total sense. Yet, I don't believe that's the right focus. Let's take a closer look at the stuttering cycle. There is predisposition, insecurity in the speaking structure, speech impediments, helplessness, feeling bad about it, stuttering, anxiety, and tension. However, the key element is what I call the refusal. I try to speak fluently, it doesn't happen the way I want, it doesn't feel great, so why would I want to continue? Consciously, of course, I want to continue, but the brain, some part of the brain, has its own view. It creates its own automated reaction. We could even say it's a very natural and logical reaction of our brain, of our body. They instinctively try to help us through this non-cooperation. They better not, of course, but that's what we have. That's what we need to deal with. So that refusal, that's what we want to change as a result of speech therapy for stuttering. And the opposite of that refusal is not quite fluency, or not only fluency, if you would. The opposite of that refusal is presence. When a person truly enjoys speaking and social interactions. And some people might say, oh, we don't need fluency for that. We can effectively communicate still stuttering. And yes, there is a concept of this effective communication. I totally agree, that's a great idea. But at the same time, I've never heard a person who stutters say, I love this stuttering moment. Because the stuttering moment itself, of course, is not a pleasant experience. So if there is a way to combine fluency and presence to create fuller alignment, fuller presence, and of course if the person who stutters is willing to go for it, I would suggest that we see that as a goal. We see that as the destination. Let's get to element 1 of successful speech therapy for stuttering, which is creating critical amount of new muscle and emotional memory. Let's turn to physics analogy. As you know, the moon goes around the Earth, and it takes about a month for a full cycle. The Earth, in turn, rotates around the Sun. It takes around a year for a full cycle. The Sun and the solar system also go around what? Right, the center of our galaxy, Milky Way. And it takes around 250 million years for one cycle. I don't want you to remember all this. I just want you to understand how critical mass matters when it comes to creating gravity. This gravity ensures stability in the system by pulling all the objects together and not letting them go. Returning to the stuttering cycle, we can see that it's a very stable system that reproduces itself over and over again. Predisposition, insecurity in the speaking structure, tension, anxiety, this refusal as the automated response of our brain and our body. So all those elements, they reinforce and support each other. It may seem that it's just the way it is, it's just the way I am. If we want to create a new system where a person feels great about speaking and social interactions, we want to create a new emotional state that starts reproducing itself over and over again, we need to generate enough new muscle and emotional memory so that a person's behavior, feelings, automated reactions, responses all start revolving around a new center of gravity that keeps it all together. How do we create new muscle and emotional memory? Through creating speaking experiences. And that already might feel frightening when you say that to a person who stutters. That's why a lot of people who stutter look for otherwise, magic-wise, learning about stuttering and its causes, learning. Like maybe I need to realize something and finally, suddenly, everything falls into place. Or looking for medications, devices, hypnosis, some magic stuttering technique. Probably I don't know something. Tell me the secret. That's why I started with physics. No fairy tales here. No magic trick. No stuttering cure. But the boring physics can feel like magic. We'll get there in element 2 as we talk about the tools. For now, let's come back to generating muscle and emotional memory. How do we do that? We want to begin with the intensive part. As you know, stuttering programs and specialized stuttering therapies for stuttering often start with an intensive part. That was my experience as well when I took my speech therapy back in the day as a person who stutters. And it's not just mechanical muscle memory, learning something in the therapy room over and over again. It's first of all emotional memory. And that's how memory works in general. We remember really well something where there's emotion attached to it. And the stronger the emotion, the better we remember it. You see, I don't remember what the weather was like yesterday. I don't remember how I started learning the training speech all by myself. I even don't remember learning the training speech in the therapy room. But I do remember the moment when we came to some college to make presentations to a group of people, to the class. I don't remember my presentation, but I do remember how I spoke, how I felt. It was a playful and joyful experience. It felt like magic. It felt like I just learned to fly. And that's already where I see traditional therapy oftentimes going a different way, offering evaluation and then some sessions, maybe once a week, maybe once in a while, without a certain amount of initial intensity. It's like an airplane that wants to take off, but instead of taking off, is just taxiing around the runway. And of course, we cannot fly to the destination without first taking off. Again, there is a lot of gravity in the stuttering cycle. So we need quite some intensity to overcome this gravity and to take off. And your clients at that first moment, they're most willing and ready to put in the work. Their determination is at the highest. So we want to use that determination. And you can test, you can experiment, there could be different formats of this initial intensive part. In my own speech therapy back in the day, it was in-person, everyday practice for several days. In the Free From Stutter program that I run for my students, I extended this initial intensive part to 8 weeks. It's all online. We have 1 hour video calls, and I tested different number of video calls per week, starting with 4, 3, and I found that having 2 video calls per week is perfectly fine, provided that they also do the routines and assignments in our private Facebook group. So it's 16 video calls in 8 weeks. The first 4 weeks are about learning the trained speech, and they start speaking this new way with their key speaking contacts and in new environments. And the next 4 weeks are about creating more challenging experiences like public speaking, real-life phone calls, approaching people in the street and recording that, asking directions, and just recording some of the everyday interactions. So by the end of this intensive part, a person can speak a new way. It's not just conceptual understanding of some technique or techniques. We create a strong momentum to move forward. At this stage, it's time to create a system. And there are so many stories in the stuttering support groups about this intensive therapies and programs after which a person was fluent, absolutely fluent for several weeks or months, and then the stuttering came back. And yes, at the very initial stage, taking a boxing analogy, stuttering gets a strong punch in the face, like boom. It destabilized what's going on, but it's not a knockdown. If we take a more peaceful analogy, we're just planting a seed. Now we have a sprout that we need to water and take care of. It's just a snowball. So we can throw it, we can leave it, or we can roll it so that it becomes bigger and grows into a new reality. The key part of the system going forward is creating speaking experiences where a person doesn't have to. And I see your role at this stage as encouragement, accountability, and providing your clients with practical steps how to do that. Basically, there are 2 kinds of speaking experiences. One is our everyday interactions that we anyway do, we have to do. The other part is where we don't have to do it, but we choose to do it. I see the second part as the most impactful piece of the system going forward. Because when a person creates a speaking experience, it in and of itself is the opposite of escaping, avoiding, withdrawal, and refusal. This is the act of presence. I'm not running away from here. I belong here. This is my land. And a typical mistake people are making is focusing only on the challenging experiences or only on staying in the comfort zone. We want to have both. This way, those experiences start to reinforce and support each other. For my students, for example, I suggest combining 3 types of speaking activities. First is our small private Facebook group where they do the routines and assignments. So once they've done it a couple times, it feels totally like comfort zone. The second one is our free from stutter Facebook group. It's still a private group, and after a couple times, it might feel like a comfort zone, but there are thousands of people, and potentially they can watch you, so it feels a bit more like public speaking environment. On top of that, we have speaking club. It's a real group gathering, so it's somewhere in the middle. And the third type, recording real life interactions. Of course, it depends on the setting and interaction, but it tends to be more challenging. And I like to use one word, performance, for all those new experiences. You can take a look at actors who stuttered. Emily Blunt, James Earl Jones, Bruce Willis, Samuel Jackson, or Steve Harvey, who even gives advice on how to overcome stuttering, all the way to public figures like Thomas Jefferson, Joe Biden, Winston Churchill. What do they do, or did they do? They show up to speak / to perform. They create public speaking environment. One of the best books about stuttering is written by John Harrison, and it's called Redefining Stuttering. You know what was the initial idea of that book? Public speaking exercises for the National Stuttering Project, now National Stuttering Association. And I talk about public speaking in my 17 stuttering techniques video. And I talk about starting a YouTube channel in my stuttering cure video. All the same idea behind all of those examples. That's how we create critical amount of new muscle emotional memory. So creating public speaking environment, or performance as I call it, is the number one exercise at this stage. Because as we practice this public speaking environment, eventually we start feeling that any interaction, whether it's a phone call, work presentation, asking a question, answering question, absolutely anything, ultimately is picking the mic, it's your turn, the stage is yours, you start speaking. Feeling that you're open, active, and positive, you can speak on your terms. And it's not just conceptual idea, you're actually doing it. Element number 2, let's see how tools can help with performance and creating speaking experiences. The tool that I used back in the day in my own speech therapy, and the tool that I use with my students these days, is called the hand stuttering technique. I labeled it the hand stuttering technique, even though it's not quite a technique. We'd better call it a method of synchronizing speaking with pressing fingers on the thumb. So what's the major problem with pretty much all other techniques, including of course the traditional speech therapy techniques? The problem is that they don't affect your client's speaking as a whole. Typically a technique is a way to respond, to react to stuttering. By nature, by default, it's reactive. We can call it, I'm trying to manage stuttering, to control stuttering, but at the very core, it's reactive, it's defensive, it's still escaping stuttering batter, avoiding stuttering batter. This is still stuttering. So with traditional speech therapy tools, as we're not targeting speaking as a whole, we're not affecting the insecure speaking structure your clients have. Imagine your client wants to say, excuse me, do you have a minute? Imagine do have a went fine. But on minute, there is a difficulty. So only at that point, your clients start thinking about using a technique, which means we're not addressing the biggest part of your client speaking, all the way to that difficulty. We're not addressing the speaking structure as such, and the insecurity accumulates. It perfectly lives here. By synchronizing speaking with pressing fingers on the thigh, we cover our speaking as a whole, from the first sound to the very end of that phrase. Initially, it sounds rather slow because we use closer to one finger, one syllable, and it's gonna sound like, excuse me, do you have a minute? But pretty fast, we're getting to using fewer fingers. We're giving that support on the stress syllables as the major pillars. Excuse me, do you have a minute? It's not some artificial prolongation or imposing some external rhythm or distracting our attention. We're simply bringing security and alignment to each and every syllable in the phrase. It's just feeling a little bit better the natural rhythmical structure of that particular phrase. We're just restoring that natural rhythmical structure. At this point, I'm sure there are quite a number of people who stutter who would say, I don't need the techniques. It depends on the individual for sure, but if we assume that stuttering develops, if we're talking about developmental stuttering, not neurogenic stuttering, which can be caused by brain injury or other structural damage. So it develops over time, and it's not coming out of the blue. It does have some ground. And we can assume that the ground for this insecure speaking structure is a mismatch, a discrepancy in the auditory feedback, in how people who stutter perceive their own speech. That's why citing poetry and singing songs are typically way easier for people who stutter, because there is a repetitive, strong, rhythmical pattern. Ba-bam, ba-bam. Very easy for our ear to distinguish, to identify. In our regular speaking, there's no pattern. So the stressed syllables are all different in each phrase. And given this discrepancy in auditory feedback, our brain feels a little lost. Like there's no ground, right? So this insecurity accumulates to the point where the glitch happens. It's like imagine the train arrives at the station. Everything is fine, but all of a sudden one door is not opening. So what do people do? They rush to the next open door, and there is a bit of a jam at that door. And maybe people squeezed in, or maybe someone is left on the platform because there is no space in that wagon. Now imagine several doors do not open, or the next train comes and the doors do not open, and it happens over and over again. So this can create more consistent rush, jam, and mess overall. And I can share my own experience as a person who stutters, as well as the experience of my students. So I often ask them when they have this practice, real life practice in our sessions, like a phone call, for example. I'm asking, how'd you feel? How'd you speak? And the person almost always says, yeah, it was way slower. It feels way slower. I think it's way slower than my regular pace. Then we listen to the recording and the person says, wow, it sounds awesome. So at the moment of speaking, the person perceives their own speech differently. That's why I can notice sometimes that people who stutter can increase their speaking pace and speed up compared to our normal regular pace of speaking. Partially it's because people who stutter tend to try to squeeze into that fluent interval as much as we can, but partially it's because of this mismatch in the auditory feedback loop. That's why most popular devices for people who stutter are DAF, delayed auditory feedback devices. And yes, they can help somewhat, but they don't change the speaking structure as such, right? So it's like glasses. When they wear them, they help, but they don't change the eyesight. The same way, the devices do not remove this discrepancy as such. Synchronizing our speaking with pressing fingers on the thigh works differently. The hand introduces another channel of sensory feedback. It brings very tangible and physical presence in the sound, starting on the syllable level. It works more like dental braces. That the idea of them is to reshape our teeth. So they give space for each tooth. In our case, the hand technique provides space for each sound, for each syllable. Removing the mismatch, removing the discrepancy, removing the insecurity in the speaking structure as such. And again, some people who stutter, of course, are going to say, I don't need the techniques, I don't like the training speech. But the brain, the body, the emotional system, they have their own view. They are going to be very thankful if we could help them. They respond with great feelings when people who stutter finally can be themselves, can be open, active, and positive, and speak on their terms. Here we're getting to element number 3 of the successful speech therapy for stuttering, which is embracing the difference and developing a new identity of how your clients see themselves. People who stutter from the point of this identity mostly fall into one of 2 categories. One, pursue fluency, and deep inside they believe they're fluent. I'm fluent in some settings, or I'm fluent when I'm alone. I'm fluent in just something. The other preaches acceptance. I stutter, it's okay to stutter. And even though they seem to be the opposite side of the spectrum, I'm fluent, I stutter, I want to be fluent, it it's okay to stutter. These are the two sides of the same coin, because in the nutshell, both categories, they're trying to say it fluently, regularly, normally, and it's not happening. There is another third option, speech therapy path, or broader working on your speaking and self-expression path. A speech therapy path is where a person can speak using the training speech, not regularly, normally, fluently. That's what I call to stutter on my terms, / to speak on my terms, because that's the same thing actually. But as I already mentioned, there is ego standing in the way. People who pursue fluency tend to say, I don't want to stutter on my terms. I just want to speak regularly, normally, and fluently. Come on, everything is fine with me, principal. Ironically, embracing the difference makes us feel regular and normal. There's nothing to hide. There's no need to escape, avoid. That is freedom. Holding on to that ego makes us very different, makes us feel that we don't belong. People who claim that it's okay to stutter tend to say, I don't need any training speech because stuttering is not a problem. Yet technically, what they do, again, they're still trying to say it regularly, normally, fluently like everyone else, and it's not happening. So it's not quite true acceptance, I would say. Not quite full acceptance. Some part of you still doesn't like this experience. Ironically, by stepping on the path of working on your speaking, we can truly accept stuttering and feel with our whole being that it's okay to stutter. It's truly not a problem. So the relationship with the training speech is a great litmus test, and I would say it's the essence of a person's true relationship with stuttering. There is this dominating ego, and there is this tiny little kid who is suffering. And it feels for a particular person that there is nothing you can do about it. But once your clients realize there is something they can do about it, there is a way they can help this kid. Once they realize there is a choice, staying inactive, staying helpless is no longer an option. So this new identity becomes the heart, the center of a new system, of a new emotional state your clients are developing. The identity determines how active a person is, and you can see that. It determines how much a person creates new speaking experiences, how much uses the training speech, how much muscle emotional memory generates, and eventually how they get to the destination and how successful speech therapy is. And the number one exercise for this identity shift, identity work, is active positive disclosure. And obviously for people who stutter, this might be the hardest thing, because by default we're trying to hide stuttering as much as we can. So when you want to practice this with your clients in different settings, different role plays, this is a muscle we want to train. This is a skill we want to develop. And as a byproduct, this is a very valuable leadership skill when you can speak on your terms. And I want you to see speech therapy as part of this bigger, broader path of self-improvement, personal development, working on a person's skill of self-expression. A person becomes a speaker. The mic is yours, the stage is yours. A person becomes a great team player because all of a sudden we're not escaping, avoiding, hiding. We're here. We want to speak more. We want to contribute. And I like an analogy with archery. So if you aim at the target, fluency, right? There's a big chance you're going to miss. I see that as your task, to help your clients aim higher so that they can hit their speaking goals. I believe speech therapists hold a huge responsibility for meeting their clients' hopes and desires. The determination this desire for change is not endless. Some of my students went through a number of speech therapist programs before joining the Free From Stutter program, but for most people who stutter, this determination is a quite limited resource. They tried this and that, if it doesn't work, they stop. Your goal as a speech therapist is to use this precious resource very carefully as fuel for clients to finally get to the desired destination. If there is anything you can do to improve your process, to make it more effective, maybe more streamlined, maybe more playful, more fun, I invite you to do that. And of course, if I could be of any help, I'd be very happy to help. Thank you so much for watching. For more videos, subscribe to this YouTube channel. If you want to go deeper into what we can do about stuttering, head over to freefromstutter.com and join my free training there. For more interaction, join the Free From Stutter Facebook group, and I'll see you in the next video.